Welcome to our survey of applications, or the ways that hristotherapy can benefit our clients. I don't know that I can adequately express how profoundly I wish that people were taught to manage their minds in adolescence. Too often we seek that knowledge only when the contradictions held in the mind become disabling. Paradoxically, our inability to resolve those contradictions hardens as an expectation, rejecting the possibility that we can harmonize our social roles. The personality fragments to address competing demands. We build barriers around those fragments, driving further fragmentation as life becomes ever more complex. To manage this fragmentation, we employ rituals. We begin our workday by logging on using our assigned account name. Arriving home, we look inside the post box. Before going to bed, we brush our teeth. Most clients call us only when those rituals begin to fail them. They break out in a sweat when approaching an elevator, or scroll vaguely through their unanswered emails. Less transparently, they walk with one shoulder forward, or their resting heart rate increases. These are all behaviors adopted by the subconscious in its attempts to keep things together. Most often, that is necessitated because the conscious mind decides to emphasize one aspect of the personality at the expense of the others. Hristotherapy interrupts this disintegration through immersion in inner harmony. Upon that baseline, we help the client diagnose the biases that they have cultivated. Once accepted, we use specific therapeutic techniques to nurture neglected parts of the personality. In this presentation, we survey the most common manifestations of mental imbalance, outlining for each the techniques that are used to restore balance. In our next series of lectures, we will begin looking at how to apply these, how we approach specific behavioral difficulties. That will be interspersed with lectures that look at the techniques that we apply to be able to create harmony across the divide of the critical mind. Here's the roadmap for this lecture. We refresh the principles of holism raised in our last lecture. While we may characterize a client's syndrome as physical, mental, or spiritual, we will always find the other aspects deserving of our attention in therapy. Then we survey our application areas: panic control, habit management, motivation, relationship recovery, triune disorders, medical crisis, and spiritual depth. The order of presentation is not entirely arbitrary. We start with the foundations of the personality and work our way upward. Panic, as we know, is a failure of basic metabolic regulation that breaks down our self-control. Habits are behaviors that once seemed beneficial, but that we cannot control when we realize that they have turned against us. Motivation comes into question when we cannot grasp opportunities that we know will benefit us. All of these basic threads become tangled together in romance, which requires that we develop independent moral judgment. The final three areas address the crises that arise when communication between the two parts of the mind is frustrated. We begin by reminding ourselves that we partner with our clients in the quest for self-understanding. In our survey of applications, you may feel motivated to pursue a particular service. Recognize that as a point of departure. In working with clients suffering from phobias, you will make them more deeply aware of their bodies, and they may come to recognize that the fear they feel during takeoff arises through empathy for their fellow passengers. In my case, that became clear only when a new student, after a hot yoga class, testified, "Thank you for helping me today." Our initial area of application often reflects our own struggles in life. In ancient Greece, each man followed that motivation to arete, or personal excellence. This quality manifested from confrontation with a disappointing truth. Success liberates energy to be directed by our fellows. New demands arise, bringing pressures for us to adapt and improve. Arete ultimately demands social wisdom as well as practical skill. In plotting your trajectory, then, you might allow yourself to be curious about applications that, at this moment, leave you cold. Panic control. To secure our survival, panic shifts us into an unsustainable metabolic state. The subconscious pushes itself forward, disrupting the waking behaviors that support social collaboration. Should our intimates voice frustration, the panic may creep into other parts of our life. A specific experience, such as falling into an open manhole, is termed a fear. The fall undermines our expectations that we can move safely through the world. The behavioral implications are enormous. Are we safe indoors? On pedestrian malls? Each night, the subconscious surveys the possibilities and dreams and may limit our choices until the threat is fully apprehended. An open manhole typically represents a threat only when we are lost in thought. This hyperfocus, paradoxically, is the gateway to phobia. A child's imagination is seeded with the warning that the world holds invisible threats called germs. Stories and experience enrich these visualizations, and the subconscious, under pressure to perceive them, begins to respond as though the imagined scenarios are real. Exhausted by the multiplying threats, it eventually realizes that panic is an effective method for enforcing inactivity. This leads to generalization. Each time that we survive an imaginary threat, the pole of panic is strengthened until the sufferer succumbs to agoraphobia, a clinical condition. Trauma is the behavioral endpoint of chronic panic. The subconscious concludes that the social identity is incapable of securing safety and withdraws support. Paradoxically, it begins to rely upon torment as a behavioral foundation. This expectation manifests as hyperreactivity. Panic is triggered by any deviation from expectations. The subconscious is not just scanning for threats, but for any change in the environment. If our client tells us, how to address panic in our clients. If our client tells us that they will not enter elevators because they see bombs, the trigger is hallucinatory. The inability to distinguish reality and imagination will undermine their ability to evaluate progress in therapy. That form of panic requires clinical intervention. Panic is an important survival mechanism. If there is a bomb in the elevator, we should panic. However, if panic prevents us from enjoying opportunities, we can infer that the subconscious self does not trust the conscious self to navigate the waking world. This insight is the foundation of panic control therapy. All therapy begins with psychoeducation. Our theory of mind illuminates the division of concerns and the hazards of inner conflict. Upon this foundation, we build a rational assessment of the perceived hazard and the benefits of sustaining responsiveness. Support for the responsive social identity is solidified through the progressive relaxation and garden path, or descent deepener techniques. We use desensitization to control the spiral into panic. Psychologists call this vagal conditioning, after the nerve that coordinates the panic response. As discussed in our lecture on personality, the vagus nerve has two fibers, a slow fiber anchored in the brainstem, and a myelinated fiber in the cortex. In the case of a fear, we first establish a state of calm, then walk the client through the memory until panic begins to arise. Prompting them to return to calm, we establish that the cortex can calm the panic. In the case of a phobia, it is the cortex that uses imaginary threats to induce panic. In this case, the return to calm allows the two parts of the mind to agree that they would much prefer to avoid panic. Extinction of the panic reaction can take several sessions. In the interim, we develop anchors that can be used to activate rational judgment when entering a triggering environment. The client will suggest a phrase or gesture to associate with their resource state, the state of calm. With trauma, this helps to ensure that the two realms are each granted appropriate authority, aiding the rehabilitation of the critical mind. Recalling that the subconscious is concerned with well-being, communicating the benefits of calm builds expectations to replace the expectation of harm. Any resistance to new behaviors can be softened by prompting the conscious mind to allow the subconscious to manage nutrition and exercise. This eases the subconscious need to use panic as a means of asserting its priorities. Lastly, we explain dream process and encourage the subconscious to validate these new agreements with venting dreams. Remember that this is the mechanism used to verify that the conscious self is ready to surrender concerns that prevent adaptation. While the therapeutic focus varies in later applications, the techniques of vertical integration from the conscious down to the subconscious and into the body, desensitization, anchors, visualization, and dream incubation will be seen again. Habit management. In therapeutic usage, habit refers to a behavior that impedes social acceptance and can cause physical harm. We will use routine to indicate a beneficial behavior in our discussion of motivation. The social rejection that associates with a habit is often a cause. The habit is a coping mechanism. The mind, confronted with inescapable rejection, channels the rejection into the body. As with the Band-Aid, the physical reaction reduces the intensity of the emotional wound. When the environment is overtly hostile, physical gestures can also serve as anchors to the trance state, helping us to focus on constructive activity. The body part involved in the habit can be diagnostic. The head reflects conflicted decision-making or repressed expression. Shoulders and chest may relate to anxiety. Lower torso and hips often signal guilt or frustration. Aggression and yearning come to rest in the arms. In the legs, a habit reveals an urge to escape. Any form of repetitive behavior can be a habit. This includes nail biting and grinding teeth, but also unproductive worry and catastrophic thoughts. Food can be a pleasant obsession, though the enjoyment we find in sugars and fats often leads to obesity. Psychoactive substances disconnect the mind from the unmet needs of the body. Nicotine and alcohol are tolerated in civil society, while opioids, amphetamines, and psychedelics lead into the darkness of criminality. Some obsessions, unfortunately, are lauded, giving the addict the illusion of acceptance. Unfortunately, the acceptance can be as shallow as the image presented to the world. Dr. Gabor Mate is a proponent of this view, seeing the pursuit of money and collectibles as addictions. Body sculpting can also mask inner wounds. Whenever a habit has proceeded to direct harm to the self or others, we must engage clinical support. Cutting is an obvious example, as is suicidal ideation. Upon diagnosis by a clinician, the client gains access to social services, and prescription medications can blunt the pain while we support the client in constructing a healthy self-concept. Dr. Mate teaches that beneath any habit is the unmet need for relationship. Every infant learns that pain arrives when mother is missing. Even more when mother provides care, the brain releases endorphins, natural painkillers that also signal that we are safe. Conversely, when isolated, the subconscious uses memories of pain to motivate us to seek an intimate connection. Children growing up in unstable environments develop the expectation that I don't matter. This stunts the growth of the networks that manage relationships. Instead, those networks are devoted to finding a relief from social wounds. The identity becomes devoted to a restless search for a substitute for love. In therapy, then, we begin with moral analysis. The client, no matter how impaired, has grown and survived. What skills, strengths, and virtues supported that journey? In trance, these are presented to the subconscious through the descent deepener, beginning the process of dethroning the influence of destructive adults. To facilitate the influence of the strengthening identity, we use rigidity challenges and transformative imagery to release limiting emotions and expectations. A rigidity challenge tenses muscles to move negative expectations into a point of contact with the environment, followed by a cathartic release. Transformative imagery includes a voyage that is attained only when suitcases full of stones are left behind. Limiting expectations associated with environmental cues. As with fears, desensitization to triggers allows a client to control their reactions, allowing the pursuit of constructive opportunities. Motivation. The flip side of self-harm is the inability to complete our goals. This is the challenge of motivation. In a hierarchical culture, motivation is considered an act of will. Tyrants believe subjects are motivated when they are compliant. Unfortunately, the easiest way to accumulate power is to impose costs on others. When the subjects are exhausted, society collapses. Tyranny is inherently unstable, at home and in the world at large. This same lesson, though, applies also to inner conflict. The conscious mind can become a tyrant. We burn the candle at both ends, eat tasty foods that lack nutritional value, constrain our movements with idleness or repetition, and turn away from affection. This tyranny is policed by negative thoughts, often biases installed by parents or teachers that were disappointed in our behavior. The subconscious, aware that our physical, emotional, and moral strength is eroding, will eventually rebel and refuse to support our goals. The Erikson stages of development provide a framework for analysis of negative self-talk. Our expectations regarding reward are seated in childhood. Unreliable nurturance from mother breeds mistrust. If our attempts to manage our bodies are undermined, we internalize shame, the belief that something is wrong with us. Suppression of the need to control our environment leads to guilt, the sense that we are at fault. Father enters the equation most directly at stage 4, where we begin to evaluate our social worth. The expression of inferiority includes passive-aggressive and passive-aggressive behaviors. And all of this sustainable motivation arises only when our well-being and intentions are aligned. In the Culture Code, Dan Coyle describes the practices of organizations that succeed by optimizing efficiency in learning. The pattern involves safety, non-judgmental openness, and cultivation of routines. While he does not use the word, from Coyle's description of those cultures, I understand that they cultivate trance. Employees engage their entire personality while they are at work. These principles apply also in organizing our internal reality. We start by building internal safety. The elements should be familiar. To progressive relaxation and the garden path or descent deepener, vertical integration establishes safety while softening the barrier of the critical mind. To address unresolved social crises, we employ inner child work to dethrone parental influence, explicitly placing the virtuous adult self in charge of our choices. We know that social anxiety disrupts sleep, creating stress on the brain that causes us to discount the body's needs. Routines in these areas will yield immediate benefits, establishing collaborative practices that will facilitate future growth. Trance work ensures that the subconscious understands the order of priorities, and the conscious mind honors the body's limits. Relationship recovery. Perhaps recognizing the importance of collaborative skills. At one time, a commitment to family was considered a qualification for corporate management. After all, the challenge is not knowing what to do, but encouraging people to work together. Sometimes recalling the child counseled by the parent in professional dress. I wonder whether the writers of early family shows were promoting this expectation. Though driven by sexual desire, our first intimate relationship is a rude awakening to the hazards of self-regulation. It is not just that we are inept, we are also emotionally enmeshed in our partner's ineptness. Historically, this was resolved through gender roles. Males provided, females nurtured. In the modern world, we negotiate our own contracts. The fifth stage of development is driven by peer dynamics. Our exploration of personality narrows as we refine the qualities that bring us influence over our peers. With failure comes role confusion that destabilizes romance. Upon progressing to the crisis of intimacy in stage 6, a particular danger for protectors is professional obsession that leads them to devalue the affection offered by their adventurer. When the conflicted priorities are left unmanaged, the intimate bonds fray and finally break. In the modern era, many of our clients use pop psychology to analyze the defects of their former partners, not considering that suspicion drives our intimates into a protective posture, frustrating future intimacy. The drumbeat of suspicion also hardens our expectations. At the core, the problem is not that good partners don't exist, it is that we no longer trust ourselves to recognize them. In the extreme, alienation leads to sex itself. Orgasm is a complex process, realized intuitively by the subconscious. Prompted by criticism from a lover or social messaging, the conscious mind can interfere. If not addressed, frustration can evolve as a triune disorder discussed next, with expressions such as vaginismus or erectile dysfunction. The paradox of relationships is that we seek to create a balanced mind while our expectations normalize our behavior. In other words, we are drawn to people that frustrate our expectations. While here we focus on romance, these considerations apply to career as well. Hristotherapy offers a unique perspective on complementarity. Sociability, which asserts our place in the world, was revealed in our lecture on personality and several popular theories of personality. To this we add nurturance, the strategies that we use to create space for the beloved, characterized as masculine or feminine. When our clients' tendencies are uncovered, we illustrate using their own relationship experience. Often this reflects the broadening of skills, usually earliest in a wounded adventurer, but inevitably in protectors as they confront loneliness. We offer tools that facilitate this growth. The adventurer's heart box and protector's value proposition validate the client's natural tendencies while protecting their characteristic virtues. We then add bilateral balancing, a technique for controlling hemispheric activation, empowering the lover to integrate the lessons offered by their partner. With this established, we engage the subconscious in a review of past experience. The framework of complementarity allows the subconscious to organize that experience. Desensitization can be used to soften alienation and liberate hope. Of course, the principles of complementarity are broad. Understanding serves only to guide us away from trauma. To construct a joyful relationship, the subconscious needs more specific criteria. This is explored in moral dialogue and seeded through descent visualization, such as the garden path, for elaboration in dreams. As introduced, these strategies are used situationally, addressing the client's immediate needs. A supportive romance, however, is an essential element of attaining personal maturity. This not only reflects that cross-pollination of virtue with other aspects of daily life, but also facilitation of the spiritual growth discussed later. Our heuristic path prepares the client for this collaboration with their partner. In our diagnosis of relationship recovery, we cited the potential for social tension to interfere with our organic function. The basic principle is that the mind protects the personality by creating a reaction in the body. When discomfort develops, the mind is confronted with its failure to resolve the social tension, which is addressed by dissociating from the body. Worse, these strategies block accommodation of our behavior to actual reality, prolonging the crisis and ensuring aggravation of the resulting discomfort. Triune disorders are rooted in evolutionary psychology. with deferred reactions arising not just in muscles, but our organs as well. Resting hormone levels drive inflammation, promoting physical discomfort. The specific locus of failure in the body is determined by tissue vulnerability arising from genetic and epigenetic factors. Any part of the body can be affected, though most commonly those exposed to environmental stress. Asthma, arthritis, and irritable bowel syndrome are all examples of triune disorders. The side effects of dissociation lead to more dangerous disorders. Reduced blood flow comes not only with discomfort, but a localized immune deficit, potentially allowing cancer to become established in the tissues that are affected. The breakdown of signal flow through the nerves affects integration with the nervous system, which reclaims unused resources, remember, thereby furthering ALS and other diseases. All of these conditions can become debilitating. The client must accept that therapy demands consent and even collaboration with their medical partner. Hristotherapy facilitates recovery from triune disorders by rebuilding the connection between mind and body. This begins with self-appreciation using the reintegration methods of progressive relaxation and the garden path. Breath work is focused on release of tension, visualizes knots to contain entanglements with the past. With gentle breaths, the energy of the tension is returned to the source, and love, the foundation of all moral action, set up between as a monitor and shield. Therapeutic imagery is a powerful tool. The decision to project into the body is intuitive. The effects are known to non-verbal networks that manage muscles, digestion, and blood flow. To access this awareness, the conscious mind must probe non-judgmentally. The process, first articulated by Carl Jung, begins by establishing a meeting place in the subconscious realm, and then to populate it with a wise guide. The place is peaceful, serene, and reserved for the self. The wise guide loves unconditionally and guides the client towards effective responses to their inner conflict. With those resources established, journeys of discovery and resolution reveal symbols understood by the subconscious. Through effective engagement, the conscious mind is qualified to facilitate deeper healing. Those that have studied Freud will appreciate the contrast here. Freud held that only the analyst could interpret the symbols offered by the subconscious. The hristotherapist's goal is that the client learns to communicate with themselves. In this, we are sympathetic to Jung. The discomfort and stress associated with triune disorders disrupts our sleep, diet, and physical activity. As the client rebalances their priorities, the benefits generate confidence in their healing capacities. The subconscious then produces the fuel of motivation. Medical crises. Medicine stabilizes the body when its integrity is compromised and is thus incapable of returning to wellness. This may be a temporary condition such as a flu or sprained ankle, or a mortal threat such as a gunshot wound or cancer. We feel anxiety when we are harmed, reflecting the disruption of routines at home and work. The body uses pain to limit activity while vulnerable tissues heal. Both anxiety and pain interfere with sleep during an episode when deep delta state rest is the best aid to recovery. Confronting any physical harm, the subconscious organizes our resources for self-preservation. In extremes, it decides which tissues to prioritize, sacrificing those that are less essential. This is the tragedy of cognitive decline. The adult identity decays so that the mind can sustain life-critical functions, buying time for a reversal that never arrives. In securing our survival, the subconscious relies upon ancient innate capacities. It knows nothing of medical technology. Introduction of surgical or chemical treatments can be felt as an additional assault, requiring reallocation of healing resources that are already oversubscribed. Until the long-term benefits of medical care are felt, The subconscious may hunker down behind the critical mind, wondering why we have surrendered agency to people that harm us. This is aggravated by our alienation from family, friends, and peers during our forced idleness. When recovery is incomplete, alienation persists until we complete our habilitation to permanent physical limitations. This involves work with our deepest expectations, with possible confrontation with social trauma from unresolved stages of development. Therapy for medical crisis seeks to assure the subconscious that the conscious mind is engaged as a partner in the struggle for healing. Our practices of breathwork and vertical integration are of vital importance. As collaborative competence is built, we can use imagery to manage pain, asking the subconscious to stop shrieking so that the client can rest, while remaining receptive to signals that they are undermining the healing process through overactivity. Through consultation with their doctor, the patient can develop a plan for recovery, and imagery can be used to guide the subconscious in allocating resources to those parts of the body. Rehearsal is a specialized form of imagery that prepares the subconscious for invasive treatments. Preparation for surgery, for example, involves progressive surrender of agency, starting with disrobing and escalating with signing away of rights and the surrender of consciousness. In trance, we walk the client through this sequence while affirming the treatment as a repair or healing support. The rehearsal continues into the recovery stage, in which we advise the subconscious to lay in resources to purge toxins and restore the integrity of our skin. Obviously, clinical consent is always required for medical crisis therapy. Spiritual depth. Spirituality is controversial. Every culture evolves practices for orienting citizens to spiritual experience, so it seems to be fundamental to the human experience. In the modern era, that truth has come under assault, both from rationalists who argue, if you can't explain it, it must not exist, and sociologists who denounce religion as the source of all human hypocrisy. To skirt these controversies, as hristotherapist, we define spirituality as the negotiation of boundaries between I and we. Until those skills are mastered, we are susceptible to debilitating existential doubts. Recognizing the layers of personality that interfere with direct perception of the world, we confront loneliness. How do we know that anything exists, or that we can trust others to reciprocate our loyalty to them? This doubt is validated by loss. We expect, in the technical sense of the word, that other people will support our behaviors, and they leave for greener pastures, betray us, or simply die. Until provided a strategy for reorganizing the personality, the mind responds to loss by tearing down networks of expectation so that we can start over. As if this work was not difficult enough, it occurs in a context of millions of years of predation. Taking what others have created can be a satisfying game, particularly when politicians and judges collaborate to shield predators from retribution. Even without objective harm, the pain of social malaise is felt by a sensitive spirit. The neophyte unwittingly absorbs the psychic wounds carried by others. This is often exploited by predators who cultivate toughness, spreading pain that prevents empathy from focusing resistance to their dominance. In the end, inescapably, life is fragile in material terms. This is the domain of science, and the evidence of its brutality is all around us. The interstate cuts through a forest. A man wearing an explosive vest can kill hundreds. Witnesses to these tragedies are pulled toward despair. While the root of the word psychology means spirit, the subtlety of spiritual experience frustrates the ambitions of scientists hoping to find evidence-based methods for therapy. It is also evident in our study of learning when, in discussing perception and imagination, we omitted spiritual insight as the third source. Fortunately, Matter, our bodies, is dense. And so we begin spiritual depth therapy by broadening and deepening the connection to the body. This is, again, vertical integration of the personality. In our vulnerability, we lean into other people to fill the voids within our souls. This is a factor in loss. Having adapted intuitively to integration with another spirit through the metaphor of the body, we collapse inwardly when that totem is removed. Mourning guides the client through an inventory of the virtues offered by the lost partner, organizing awareness within the subconscious mind that focuses a search for a replacement, or, as resilience is a benefit, distributed among a community of replacements. Priming of the subconscious search uses familiar methods. Still, if loss is inevitable, why persist in the face of vulnerability? This can only be satisfied by confidence that suffering has meaning. This territory has been plumbed by our great spiritual avatars, and the common report is that love is with us. We anchor that presence in the subconscious, establishing the wise one in the client's own place. Emulating Jung, we guide the client through the inner landscape to encounter avatars, ancient representatives of the stages of spiritual development. As the client's intuition develops, we teach them to navigate in the space of perception. Sensory, emotional, and spiritual perceptions must be harmonized. Consider this question. If a butterfly makes you feel happy, is there an angel waiting in the wings? We know only if we can shift our focus to the spiritual realm. This is the opportunity of lucidity. Lucid dreaming is cultivated by psychologists, but also evolves naturally when the subconscious, facing a crossroad in its dream work, asks the conscious mind to offer suggestions. The converse is also possible. In waking life, we can drop into the spiritual realm to ask, what's going on here? We return to normal waking with insights that allow us to navigate successfully towards our goal. At a deeper level, our karmic journey unfolds through many lives. In each life, we do work on our souls. These goals manifest as dense knots or complex patterns. In exploring alternate lives, we help the client visualize and coordinate their spiritual work across those lives. So in summary, once again in therapy, we consider all aspects of the client's experience, social, physical, and spiritual. We facilitate healing and growth by building collaboration between the conscious and subconscious minds. In each of our 7 areas of application, we identified the methods that restore and enhance mental balance. In the lectures to follow, we will discuss these specific applications and specific therapies and the various methods in depth. Returning again to theme, hristotherapy facilitates the client's growth into responsive maturity. Clients often come to us because a strategy used early in life no longer serves them today. The challenge of hristotherapy is to discern the nature of the inner conflict. It is obvious to us when the subconscious has seized upon panic as a means of saying no to the plan set forth by the conscious mind. The client may instead use habits to manage their mental state. Habits that can become destructively obsessive when intimate relationships are dominated by fear. Even in a supportive social environment, conflicted priorities can undermine motivation, which is resolved through direct negotiation. In forming our intimate and professional relationships, the patterns established with our parents often need to be reevaluated. When social pressure traps us in conflict, we may sustain mental equilibrium by projecting our reactions into the body, generating a triune disorder. These projections may graduate to or exacerbate illness that requires clinical intervention. Without explanation, the subconscious can struggle in managing these interventions, with demoralization in the worst case. In every application, we address the client's complaint while laying a foundation for future growth. That leads ultimately to integration of the 3 realms of perception: sensory, emotional, and spiritual. Our choices are no longer controlled by illusions fed by ourselves and others. Having learned to manage their minds, our clients discover that the journey is the destination. We may not know what is going to happen next, but we no longer travel alone.